Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy, a Corey Wray press conference recap show. My name is Matt Baker. Thank you for joining us on the live stream. This is going to be just a me episode, so strap in. And the idea of this episode is going to be kind of giving just a blow-by-blow of a lot of comments that Corey Wray made during his press conference, thoughts, reactions to some of those, and any questions you guys might have. This is kind of a companion episode to what I did with Justin Horniker in looking at the overall official announcement of Corey Wray. So hopefully this gives you a little bit more insight in the fallout, to borrow one of our usual terms, to Corey Wray's press conference and what could potentially be a dry spell. St. Louis City now has a sporting director. We've heard that the head coach search will probably ramp up a little bit. So there's going to be, obviously movement behind the scenes on finding a head coach, but the next activity for Major League Soccer, as far as offseason goes, isn't until December 10th. Movement between now and then. But as you're going to hear in some of these comments that Corey Wray made, a lot of the work right now is going to be in both getting his visa taken care of, making sure that he has a work permit in the United States, and doing kind of an analysis of the organization itself. No doubt a lot of behind the scenes conversations will be happening now between Corey Wray, Diego Gigliani, Carolyn Kindle, probably John Hackworth, and the entire sporting department on the direction going forward. Deep diving who's working there, who will be working there, who do we need to bring in, all of these different kinds of things. It was kind of an illuminating conversation that Corey had, and I think it offered a lot of insight into what we can expect from him, potentially at least in the early days going forward. Haven't started the pod recording yet, so if you're just joining us, you've got some time for that. Chris, it is a Gruther Firth kit that I'm wearing right now. As I'm recording this, if you're watching later, it is Footy Kit Friday, and as much as possible, you work from home type environment, I try to partake in that, but always love to sport the green as we're getting into, probably too early for some folks, but the holiday season on November 7th. Happy late birthday as well to Corey Wray. On the off chance that Corey Wray is a Flyover Footy viewer or listener, maybe he'll see this and know that the fans wish him all a happy birthday. That happened, I think, the day after his announcement, the press conference, which was pretty hilarious timing. So we're going to get into this. We've got a handful of topics that we're going to really talk about. We've got high level, who is Corey Wray from his own words. We're going to get into his time with Montreal, get into his thoughts on the head coach. The sporting department itself, he had a lot of comments on that, a lot of roster and squad building information. It seemed a lot high level, but he actually did talk a pretty good amount about roster building or squad building and roster construction, as he called it. We talk about his use of data a little bit, and then kind of what he referenced in the St. Louis fandom expectations that the fans have that he knows they have, and then a look ahead to MLS offseason. So thank you for joining me on this lunchtime edition of Flyover Footy, and let's get going with the pod recording. Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Flyover Footy that will be looking at the Corey Wray introductory press conference. Kind of a companion pod of sorts to what Justin Horniker and I did earlier this week, but right after the official announcement, but before the press conference. So this kind of wraps up that entire opening saga, so to speak, of Corey Wray. Corey Wray spoke to media on Wednesday, November 5th. Gave his introductory spiel, answered questions. And so I feel now we have a pretty good idea of Corey Wray himself. So as promised, whenever something happens this offseason that's newsworthy and that I think could fill a podcast, I will be bringing that to you. This is no different. So on this edition of Flyover Footy, we will be looking at quotes from Corey Wray. We've got multiple segments that I'm going to be bringing that have different topics. We're going to start with kind of a refocusing of who Corey Wray is, hearing from him and his thoughts in his own words. We're going to hear a little bit transitioning from his experience with Toronto, Columbus into Montreal and what his thoughts were on Montreal, which was his most recent stop before St. Louis. We're going to be looking at his comments that he had as far as the head coaching search criteria, who he's looking for. And then after that, kind of a look at the overall sporting department, the sporting structure, and what Corey Wray was describing in how he expects the organization to work on the sporting front. And then a big look at the roster and squad building. So Corey Wray had a lot to say on what he's looking for in how he looks to mold this roster, mechanisms in MLS, DPs, TAMs, budget constraints were discussed. And so we're going to be looking at Corey's quotes on that. And then his use of data will kind of round us into the home stretch, which Corey Wray does seem like a pretty data-driven front office employee. So that's something that we will be looking for a lot for Corey Wray, wrapping it up with his expectations on the fan base and what he knows we will be asking of him in this role. And a little bit look ahead. We're going to close the show out with a look ahead of some of the offseason calendar as a reminder of what Corey Wray will be dealing with and some of the timelines around what we can expect hopefully after a head coach is hired, and then on the player roster building front. So I'm going to start this one off by kind of dialing it back. If you missed our pod earlier this week with Justin Horniker and our deep dive into who Corey Wray is, what his experience is, we've got some of that to start us off. I want to give a quick shout out to Jeremy Clements on Twitter, on Blue Sky. Jeremy Clements is now a co-host of the new podcast. I think it's Red Smoke Rising. I'm going to have some graphics on that here in a minute with my friend Tom Franklin, Soccer Zombie, and Jake Henry. So they have this new podcast, and Jeremy is one of my favorite graphic designers. I don't even know if he considers himself a graphic designer, but he creates these great graphics of quotes that we obtain during the press conferences and trainings, and he puts them kind of in this great image. So if you're a visual learner, if you're watching this podcast on YouTube or when we're live streaming, you're going to see those graphics. Otherwise, I'll be reading them, so you don't have to worry if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We are an equal opportunity. If you tune in, we'll give you every different which way to understand what we're talking about. So I want to start off by looking at Corey Ray's career highlights. So if you don't recall, Corey Wray has almost a 20-year history in Major League Soccer. That is where all of his history comes from. Corey Wray is an MLS guy through and through. Started in 2007 with Toronto. He moved up the ladder from an intern in 2007 all the way up to kind of an assistant GM type role, where he was mostly responsible for the academy and their affiliate team. He was hired by Columbus in March of 2020, worked for them for a little over 4 years. Both of these roles, he was working under Tim Bezbatchenko, and he was hired as an assistant GM and the GM of Crew 2 in 2020. So a lot of his resume comes from that. In the structure from Toronto and Columbus, it was pretty much similar, where he was working under the auspices of a CEO, a sporting director, a general manager, whatever their titles were at the time, in an assistant capacity to them. He left Columbus when Columbus hired the other assistant GM, Issa, I forget her last name, Issa, one of Tim Bezbatchenko's assistant GMs, hired her into the Crew hired her after Tim Bezbatchenko left. So Corey Wray left Columbus. He worked in Montreal as a consultant at first in 2024, in the summer of 2024. By November of 2024, he was hired as their, quote, director of soccer. And I say quote because of what we're going to learn about the structure of Montreal being vastly different. So I wanted to set the stage for his overall experience here, because we're going to get into some quotes of what Corey actually said regarding his own experience in his own words before we look at this Montreal situation, which was pretty vastly different from what he had been doing in Toronto and Columbus. So let's pivot over to what Corey said regarding his time, regarding his experience, really. Talking about the people he worked with, I think Corey says 4 ownership groups, 5 different sporting directors of some sort, hundreds of players, 12 head coaches, multiple second team coaches, and a lot of different people within the league and outside. Corey said, I've been to 5 MLS Cup finals, being a part of a winning team in 3 of those. I've been to 2 Champions League finals, unfortunately losing those. And I could say, not to brag or gloat, but I say that as an understanding of what you can learn from those opportunities and what you can learn in those moments. Corey goes on to say, and I think that's what I'm bringing here, a very large network of people now throughout the world that I've been in contact with, have worked with, have signed contracts with. And I think that will provide the necessary next steps for what we need to do here in the short term and the long term. And I think Corey Ray's contacts is probably an understated story in this entire saga, where we know his experience. We expect him to be understanding of the roster rules, understanding of all the mechanisms. But in all of these positions, Toronto and Montreal on the Canadian side, Columbus on the American side, Major League Soccer is becoming a more global league. And so Corey Wray, I saw a stat earlier today on Blue Sky that Corey Wray, if you look at the most recently announced U.S. men's national team roster, 25% of them were at one point or another recruited by Corey Wray, and 40% of the U.S. MNT midfield for this cycle right now in November was signed by Corey Wray, or at least Corey Wray was a part of that. So we're talking high-level experience and U.S. men's national team players and otherwise, Columbus, Toronto. It's not just the players, it's the agents, it's the coaches, it's the GMs, the front office folks. So this is a man who has grown up in MLS and now has a lot of experience and contacts. We talk, and the reason I mention this is because we talked about Lutz Pfannenstiel's contacts, having all of the experience, having all of the relationships with all these other agents and contacts in Europe. Corey Wray might not have that exact same geographical focus on his contacts. It's, good or bad, depending on who you're asking. Maybe it's time for a change on that front as well. But don't think of Corey Wray necessarily as a man who just knows the rules and has a lot of bookkeeping knowledge. He not just built rosters on the 2 team and with the first teams. He has all of these experiences and relationships as well. One other thing that Corey said about himself is he says, quote, "I promise that I will be working on those decisions that might be seen as maybe the best ones all the time. I will not rest until we get this right. I will lose sleep over it. I will have probably moments where I'm struggling for the answer, but I will not stop thinking about how to make this team the best team in MLS and then hopefully one day in North America." With this, I think Corey Wray had an interesting anecdote at the press conference talking about the pizza scene in Columbus, where he was told it was a good pizza scene. He tried the pizza, didn't like it. So what does he do? He doesn't just continue searching. He goes out and buys his own pizza maker. He goes out and gets his own ingredients and he makes it himself. So he thinks outside the box, even off the field on, and this might speak to his personality and how much he's willing to go and the different lengths he's willing to go to make sure that he is in front of or responsible for a winning product, a successful venture, a top-notch food being prepared for his family, all of those different things. And I think that speaks to his personality as much as it will his work ethic and his commitment to excellence here in St. Louis. Now, with this, Corey Wray did, I think, try to set an early tone about maybe the next few weeks, maybe the next couple of months, maybe even the next early part of next season, where he goes on to say, "I think it's very important to understand we're going to have an assessment period. That will be very quick, but done to the best of my ability. It will be clearly looking at the roster, talking to all the staff, and I've already begun that over the last couple of days, making sure I have a real firm understanding about what we have here internally. Then we will start to set a shared vision and direction going forward. That will incorporate all of the people I just spoke about, making sure from that we're going to set new standards for high performance within the group, how we operate, communicate, and how we look at new decisions being made going forward." This is an organizational reset of sorts. Yes, it may involve a little bit more of hands-on effort from Diego Gigliani. That could be a byproduct of this, as far as maybe being more forceful in the questions he asks. We know that Diego has been the quotes that Diego has put out, and we talked about him on the last episode, really recommitted and reaffirmed his lack of desire to overstep into the technical grounds, his desire to be responsible for having a say in some of these decisions with the strategic vision, how you organize the whole entirety of St. Louis City. Yes. But as far as we know now from Corey Ray's comments here and otherwise from Diego, this is Corey Wray who will be responsible overall for the technical decisions and then making all of those recommendations to Diego. But when we think about recommendations to Diego, I, at least at this point in time, am envisioning a process where Corey Wray does all the work. He figures out who he wants and what he wants. He understands the budget concerns. He understands the constraints we'll talk about in a minute. And then he says, "Diego, this is the guy." And they might have conversations, but the decision-making on the technical front isn't going to be overridden by Diego Gigliani. That's at least the perception that's being given here. And really quick, before we jump into Montreal and Corey Ray's last stop, and then shifting over to the head coach, I wanted to really shout out how this press conference unfolded and how it begun. If you're familiar with any kind of monumental moment in St. Louis history where press conferences occur as a prelude or a result to something, whether it's Olaf Melberg, Bradley Carnell, any Lutz Pfannenstiel even, Diego has been there, right? And so ever since I think Bradley Carnell was dismissed back in 2024, Diego has been there alongside Lutz, out in front, a united front of sorts, but also being there to take responsibility and putting himself in that position of being alongside Lutz or Olaf or whoever as the forward-facing person to answer questions. Take it how you want that it was only Corey Wray in this press conference. There was one chair. There was no introduction as this is our new sporting director. This is why we wanted him. This is the explanation that we have. This is who all we looked for. None of that. Some of that was put out in the press release that occurred when Corey Wray was announced. Diego had a handful of quotes there, and he gave a great interview to Tom Timmerman on a lot of topics. So Diego put himself out there as far as information and quotes, but he didn't put himself front and center when it comes to actually revealing, announcing, introducing Corey Wray as our new sporting director. And I feel that's noteworthy, and I feel that could also be taken a few different ways. Not wanting to put himself front and center, maybe in response to some of the concerns of his potential overstepping and the reports from Tom Bogert that he does want to be more involved in the sporting department. But it also could just be a shift in a new way of looking at things for St. Louis City, that this is Corey Ray's time in the spotlight. Let him tell his own story. Let him be the one to answer all of the questions. I appreciated that. I kind of liked the idea of it being focused on Corey Wray, as opposed to sometimes in the past when we had asked questions of Lutz and Diego, there did seem to be a little looking back and forth at each other of, do you want this? Should I take this? Who's got the scope of responsibility? And then after one would answer, Lutz would answer, Diego would follow it up with something. And there wasn't that dynamic at play because Diego removed himself from being in that position. And I do kind of appreciate that. I liked that this was focused specifically on Corey Wray when Diego had already given some of the quotes about the process and everything to the press release and to Tom Timmerman at the Post-Dispatch ahead of time. So I did appreciate that. Just a little aside on that, my thoughts about the overall vibe of the press conference. Now going forward, let's look at Corey Wray with Montreal. Montreal, Corey Wray said, I see that as maybe a difficult time for me in terms of their vision for wanting to do things in a different way. But I saw it as a really great moment for me to learn, and it really helped me prepare for my opportunity here in terms of really trying to think about establishing a clear vision, refining some of those processes that maybe didn't work so great when I was there. And there's a lot that we could dive into about Montreal. Andy Coronado on X, and it's on my Twitter and X as well, is a Montreal. He covers Montreal for The Ball Is Round, their podcast out there. And him and I had been talking and him hoping that Corey Wray would speak on Montreal a little bit. So I wanted to make sure that we had that, because Montreal was seen, I think, as the possible red flag of Corey Wray. You have his growth in MLS, success from Toronto, success in Columbus, and then you hit this speed bump of sorts in Montreal, where it's very short-lived. The responsibility is kind of different and nebulous, starting as a consultant, becoming director of soccer, and then not even lasting a full calendar year in that position before members of the family, the Saputo family that owns Montreal, took over. Very weird scenario. And so Corey was very much not slinging mud. He definitely didn't speak bad about the organization at all, but he highlighted the differences in their organizational approach. And this is the takeaway for me, is that Corey himself had said that the structure in St. Louis is more like Columbus and Toronto. And that's what he's expecting as far as the general management structure, the individuals making decisions and collaborating as a more of a organizational hierarchy. He referred to Montreal as a council, and he was sitting on that council. And we know for sure that council contained at least two members of the Saputo family, two of the two who took over direction of the sporting department. And so as a voice on this council, Corey really never made media appearances. This was one of the reasons that Montreal fans were so interested in what he would have to say, because they didn't hear from him. I saw a comment on Twitter. One Montreal fan didn't even know what he sounded like and was surprised that this is what Corey sounded like. That's the level of knowledge that they had about Corey Wray when he is supposedly their director of soccer and making the decisions. That wasn't the case. He was a member of a multi-person council where we don't know if he recommended things and they didn't come to fruition, if maybe he's responsible for Prince Owusu and their leading goal scorer this year, and he was recommending that part. We don't know all of that. So that's another reason I look at Montreal and what happened in his time period there, the lack of success, the lack of tenure, as a speed bump. And what Corey says here, something to learn from, because it also does have value. It's value added for you to come to an organization with proven success, but also moments of struggle, knowing that it's not just a here's what the good things were that I can take to St. Louis, but here's some things I saw that really didn't work very well when it comes from an organizational perspective, but also roster building. Montreal obviously is going through a rebuild. They've said so earlier. They said so during Corey Ray's tenure. And so Corey has that knowledge now. He can bring that lack of success, those issues that he saw with Montreal, where he might have been a cog in the wheel as opposed to the guy, and bring those to St. Louis as lessons learned. I think that's a very much positive aspect that we can look to for his time at Montreal compared to the success that he had with Toronto and Columbus. Now let's look at what probably the two most exciting things I think Corey Ray talked about: the head coaching search, and then we'll talk about the sporting department and the roster building. So maybe three. But the head coaching search, that's paramount on pretty much everybody's mind right now. So let's start looking a little bit at some of the conversations Corey said about the head coach. And this one's kind of a long one. So Corey said, I think there will always be parts of the DNA of the club that remain the same for sure. I think there is more down to things that have been done in the past that work seemed pretty, that work seemed pretty comprehensive. If you look at wanting to be on the front foot, if you look at excitement for the fans, if you look at a lot of the grit and determination that people want to see from the players, I don't see that changing. And I think that is just smart roster building. Corey goes on to say, and smart soccer in some ways, how we manage to use that throughout the week to week and whatnot will be up to the coach. So we'll have a clear vision specifically of what that looks like, hopefully very soon. Corey goes on to say, I'm working on that now with Diego and the rest of the leadership, but we will communicate that as soon as possible. And then from there, I think that will create clarity in terms of what we're looking for from a head coach as well. The timelines on this, I think, are, like they've said before, they're speeding up a little bit. So the desire to create this cohesive vision going forward, this is a gut check moment for St. Louis. Yes, they picked up player options based on the style of play they'd been running. Yes, Diego has said before that they don't expect the overall style to play. And I'm not expecting a 0 to 60 moment where we have been a low possession, direct to goal, counterattacking team, high pressing team. I don't expect that to go into a San Diego style of play where we're possession, we're short passing, we're wanting to control the ball, pull teams into us. I don't see that entire massive shift. I also don't see I see the lessons learned from Olaf, knowing what didn't work when we tried to play the ball out of the back and those kinds of issues that can occur when you have the specific players. So there's a lot of other quotes that I think are going to play into the style of play that we want to be instilling in our organization, along with the types of players that Corey's looking to bring in and the sheer knowledge that this isn't just a first team, this is an organizational approach. And that Corey Ray's knowledge and experience from academies, two teams, and first teams, I think will help create this alignment. And don't forget, John Hackworth is still in the room. John Hackworth is still the technical director of St. Louis City SC. So what is Corey Ray looking for in a head coach? Well, I think he laid that out pretty well for us. He said, quote, they have to be a good person. And I think the character of that person is going to be paramount to moving past any first stage of what we're doing. From that, we will then start to look at our club and the vision of what we're trying to do and where they fit into that. And I think that's going to be the next stage of defining the profile, Ray said. He goes on to say, and then we get into the X's and O's and the coaching. But we do not go past those first two stages if it's not right. And I think that will be very important in this process to make clear that we're going to get those first two right before we go on to the last one. The first two, again, being the good person, the character of the person, and then the vision of what they're trying to do and what if they fit into that. And then you get into the X's and O's. That is a good window into the process. It doesn't help us on the timeline or whether David Critchley fits into that necessarily, although we know Critchley is a candidate for the position still. But it gives an idea of what Ray's looking for. And it feels very much foundation building, right? You're not necessarily saying we are a almost polished team. We have all of the pieces in place. Now we just need an X's and O's guy to carry it across the finish line and get us into the playoffs, win us silverware. He seems to be starting almost from the ground up of saying, I want this to be a long-term vision. I'm taking St. Louis into the next era. We have to get this coach has to be a good culture fit, a good person, and can't really have any of the types of issues that I think we've seen in the past, maybe with a Bradley Carnell and Olaf Melberg. This is a very intentional approach, I think, to course correct in some of that. The last thing I think Corey Wray said on the head coach that I want to kind of talk about is looking at the profile and criteria. So Ray went on and said, so what do I mean by that profile? Some of the things that you spoke about. So how do they use, film? How do they communicate with the players? How do they break down the match reports? How comfortable are they using some form of data? And do they feel like they're able to sit with a group and work collaboratively? Or are they a person who needs to be by themselves and just have us cater to them? I think I'm looking for the first version of what I'm explaining, referencing someone who's able to sit with a group and work collaboratively. So we're not looking for a big ego. We're not looking for maybe even a big name or someone who says, I know what I'm doing. Everybody fall in line to me. This approach, and Ray maybe personifies this approach, is seemingly designed to create a collaborative nature among the entirety of the sporting leadership. Yeah, it does include Diego as that top man of the organization, but especially Corey Wray, John Hackworth, and whoever the head coach is, alongside other, I think, people who are going to play very important roles in the sporting department. And so let's pivot to look at that sporting department for just a minute. Corey Wray had a few things to quote on this one. He goes, I think just based on some high-level assessments, we need to improve probably maybe some of the expertise in the sporting leadership. I am one person. I am not going to change everything by myself. I'm not going to be able to make this a powerhouse by myself. And so I think we could really use some additions in that space. The second thing Corey Wray said is to kind of redefine or relook at how we're scouting players. There's probably a gap there. Currently, we do have people on staff. I think my job will be to support them and try to create a scouting process that can look at domestic, international, and then also incorporate the internal side that I was speaking about and find a way that we can have it talk to each other. Corey Wray talking about internal MLS as far as that goes, or even internal to the organization itself on their scouting of Academy City 2 products and so forth. And the focus on the scouting department is fascinating because, yeah, there have been rumors and reports, and I can confirm some of that the scouting department rather at St. Louis City has historically not been large, to say the least. And we know that Lutz has leveraged a lot of his relationships in some of the players, especially the high dollar players and the transfers that he has brought in. We know there have been restrictions, limitations based on MLS roster rules and navigating that. But when Corey talks about some of these desires for the collaborative approach to the sporting department, I think this season, as this offseason, as short as it may be, is going to be the first few dominoes to fall in this organizational, possibly even reshuffling. Mentioned Vinco earlier this season, director of team operations, is no longer with the club. There have been resumes or job roles posted for analytics and scouting. So this is very much a team that I think is looking to overhaul a lot of aspects in addition to bolstering their on the field. So that's where we as a fan base are looking at this right now. Is we may not get a whole lot of information. We may be looking at some LinkedIn profiles to see who's been hired and things like that. But there are going to be massive changes. There's going to be maybe an increased volume of people who work on the sporting department staff for St. Louis, but there will be changes as this restructuring, reorganization, analysis, and evaluation occur by Corey and Diego. So it's not like we're overhauling everything, but some of the things that Corey Wray said that we've talked about already and we're going to still mention do give a little insight into a longer term approach. And on this note, I can say that I've heard, it has not been reported in any articles that I've read, but Corey Wray is on a multi-year deal. Don't know how specific the length is, 2, 3, 4 years, whether there are some options behind that, which there usually are. But it was said to me that Corey Wray is under a multi-year contract. And so he seems to be treating this as this is his project, the multi-year evolution of where he wants this organization to go. And now let's pivot a little bit to look at the roster and squad building, because I think this is one of the two focuses with the head coaching, and everybody likes the background on the sporting side, but roster and squad building is a huge component of this. So let's look at a few comments that Corey Wray had on where he sees this roster going forward. First, Corey said there's clearly some opportunities to improve the overall group. And I can't help but laugh at that because we all know there's opportunities to improve this group. That's obvious and necessary to be said as a level setting, I suppose. Yes. He goes on to say, we will do that immediately. We have a few different opportunities through the MLS mechanisms coming up that you're probably aware of in terms of re-entry drafts, free agencies, and super drafts. Then from there, we need to set a lot of things in the structure long term. So you're talking about real big decisions that need to be made on structure for the larger decisions from an MLS mechanisms, your TAM players, your DPs. And I want to stop right here before getting to the DP too heavily, because I cannot tell you, if you listen to our podcast long enough, or even a few episodes, you probably understand my passion for the nerdy side of soccer, not just the analytics, but as much as people complain about the roster rules and the mechanisms of MLS, I find it fascinating to try and make sense of that, to be able to understand at least a little bit of what happens and why things are happening and what opportunities teams have, what aren't they taking advantage of, what are they taking advantage of. That may be one of the most exciting things about Corey Wray to me, is that he brings this expertise. I can look at Corey Wray and say, if I have an idea of what's going on with a U22 spot, my frustration about the fact that JGR is still taking up a U22 spot, even though he's on loan, maybe that's not a move Corey Wray makes. Maybe he decides to do something different because he wants to maximize that roster spot. I don't know. But it does at least get, with him listing out all of these different offseason processes, all of the mechanisms of the GAMs, the TAMs, the DPs. This does reinforce Corey Wray knows what he's doing. He's got this experience and he's talking about a lot of it here. There are, and we're at the end of this pod, we're going to talk about some of the offseason calendar of events, and they dovetail right into these things Corey Wray mentioned: the reentry drafts, the super drafts, waivers, free agency. This is how our roster may get built going into next season while this evaluation analysis period goes on, and we look at who do we actually want to bring in on some of these big TAM or DP type deals, because we do have flexibility on a TAM or a DP player or a U22 player. And so I'm okay with this. And we historically, I don't think, have been the biggest takers in this market of free agency, waivers, and reentry, especially where there are drafts that occur that you do not have to select a player in. There's 2 stages of reentry, 2 stages of waivers. St. Louis hasn't been big players in this market. Maybe that changes a little bit because of who might be available out of contract with teams, but they don't meet the free agency requirements yet. Those are some of the things that Corey Wray will bring, and that happens in December. I think we can look forward to potential movement on those fronts. Now, on the DP front, Corey Wray goes on to say, quote, "We need to be very cautious about just getting a DP or getting the right DP. A lot of work needs to be done behind the scenes to ensure that we do have a good strike rate on those players. So I'm confident that there's a desire to win in terms of the ambition of ownership, and they're committed to resourcing that how we see fit." So a commitment, let me talk about that again, a commitment to resourcing. And there's going to be talks about budget constraints in a moment, but knowing that we're talking about the right DP, the right fit, but also acknowledging that there is a desire to spend. There's a desire to go out and get a DP if it's the right fit and one that can help the team in the long-term way, not just maybe an available DP that you think can score goals objectively by themselves in a silo, but how do they fit with Klaus? How are they going to fit with Marcel Hartl? How are they going to fit with Edu Leuven underneath of them? With Song Ben out on the right, with maybe Makai Joyner or Salio on the left, where's that best fit? Where's that criteria? And maybe even using some of the head coaching search criteria of just, being a good person, having good character, good reputation, all of those things. The budget constraints that Corey talked about, he goes further into it saying, quote, "I will get into those discussions further in terms of setting budgets and looking at that, but I don't see that as being something that is going to be prohibitive in terms of my plan. I think it's about providing a plan that makes sense, that is supported by all the different things when you're looking for additional funds. I think you need to do your job to create, I'd say, some sort of confidence in that process. And then from there, I see a huge desire to be part of that global transfer market and look for the right player for St. Louis." And I look at the middle of this quote, and I think this is where Corey's explaining what his responsibility is in this process. His responsibility isn't to spend the money. His responsibility is to identify and justify the expenditure of that money. And so if Corey Wray does his job as he's saying that he intends to do, it's to create the confidence in the process and I talked at the press conference. I was the one who asked the question about the 120-page document that Corey presented to Diego as part of his interview. it's his job to create that kind of justification, all angles of this is why we need to be spending the money. And I think there was some concern at times that maybe Lutz didn't do that well enough that the organization was willing to spend the money that we as fans want them to spend, or at least there was some disconnect in that process, whether it's, whoops, sorry, lost y'all there. Whether it's Lutz identifying a player and not making the case, whether it's the money not making sense, Corey's responsibility in justifying this to ownership as far as the funds being spent, he understands that. And so when we talk about the structure, the collaborative approach, what his role is, we think of a leader of the sporting department making the decisions, but making the decisions inherently in this structure involves recommending or making the case for a guy you want, planning on it, wanting it, needing it, and saying, this is our guy. But ownership has to be willing to spend. Corey Wray doesn't just have the millions of dollars to spend the money. He's got to make the case. And that's where this fits into the whole equation. That's where there's this nuance, I would say, to what his approach is versus just saying, I'm going to be responsible for bringing in players. This is a little more transparent, I think, into the process that we have wanted from potentially day one. So talked about the budget constraints a little bit. Let's look at squad building and Corey's long-term approach. Corey says, quote, we're going to build a squad to meet standards that I see as a winning kind of formula. I think it's very important to understand that in squad building, the right pieces are not always available. He says, I think you can imagine you just go out and get what you need, and they're perfect characters, and they fit everything the coach needs. That's not always the case. So please bear with me, he says, while we make sure we get the right people into the club, and then last but not least, achieve success. This is the longer term approach I think Corey's looking at, where it's level setting with the fan base of what this is going to take, and the fact that just because fans, they may see somebody be on the market for as a free agent or out of contract, or another team is willing to sell them, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fit with any of the criteria or all of the criteria that St. Louis is looking for. This is why I don't ever try and project players specifically in the transfer market. This is why I stay away, so far anyway, on saying, all right, this player is out there, we should go get them. There might be some exceptions, like a Julian Gressel, I think last year, year before, when it was known that he was going to be available. I think that kind of a player where you can make more clear connections and how they fit and how they could be acquired, yes, that could make sense. But in general, I don't go fishing for players because of the volume that are out there and all the different criteria that organization sets, but we don't know about. Now it feels like we have a little bit of an understanding of maybe what their mindset is and what Corey's going to be doing. More squad building insights. Let's look at this quote from Corey saying, there are a lot of really good pieces here. I think you guys saw the improvement in the squad. There are some quality players on this team. And what I think is we just need to provide the next level of structure and clarity in terms of roles. There needs to be a little bit better work done on how they all work together. And I think that's very important for me as well as recruiting, is to do the pieces complement each other or not. And then finally, I think there are, questions about how we want to play. And so once that's determined, that can change my opinion on kind of if the players are right or wrong for this group. This speaks to the time in the period of time that Corey Wray is in with St. Louis City, is that they don't have a head coach. They don't have a specifically dictated style of play beyond some generalities, I think, that Diego had talked about. They don't have a different idea of what kind of players they want to bring in yet. So they're going to be looking at all of these things, multitasking in the way that they do it. But some of the decisions that will get made, Corey is basically saying, are going to change some of those things. Whoever they get as their head coach, whatever they determine their specific style of play is, and what types of players can enhance that style of play from our current squad could change if that player is right or wrong for the group. It could even change the existing players we have. Just because a player is under contract now doesn't mean they can't be dealt. So you might have the other end of the spectrum where Corey has a group of 22 players under contract right now. And if he determines that their head coaching work, who they bring in as a head coach, where they want to go as an organization, doesn't align with a specific player, they may put that player on the trade block, try to move him out. So we could also likely see changes from who St. Louis has currently under contract that was signed with Lutz or was an option picked up by Hackworth, that may end up getting moved because of the analysis and the determination that Corey makes with the rest of the sporting leadership group. The last component of roster building that I kind of really want to focus on rather heavily is the player pathway element to this. Corey Wray said, I think just high level, just making sure that all the different parts of the club are speaking to each other. That's the easiest way for me to say when I'm taking a decision to trade for, acquire a player that we've done all the work internal to project out. But when the pathway is set for the next player in that position, that we're not blocking that player. And then deeper than that, we need to do a good job at benchmarking across the club, highlighting what great is, what makes an MLS player in the pathway. And I'm confident in the group right now, from what I've heard, that they're doing a good job. And I like the end of this, that the club is doing a good job from what Corey's heard, because this isn't new. The idea that St. Louis doesn't want to block a player has existed since Lutz was in position. The growing the system and having cohesive organizational philosophies from the academy to the two team to the first team is designed to create these pathways. And so you look at some of the players that are prime and ripe for those pathways right now, Mekhi Joyner, first and foremost. Mekhi Joyner as a left mid, left winger, maybe you don't go out and spend a DP slot on that left side because it would be blocking Mekhi Joyner. That's a potential way they could evaluate this. Very simplistic, but a potential way they could evaluate this. In addition, you've got Tyson Pierce, a right back by trade at this point, who can also play midfield. You got Thomas Totland under contract. So if I'm just spitballing one facet, maybe you don't want to sign a more expensive right back because you trust Thomas Totland and you want Tyson Pierce to take that next step as his understudy or counterpart or rotation player on the right side. Just a couple examples of two players that I think are two of the, if not the most exciting prospects at City 2 and are making the jump right now, both with homegrown contracts, to be contributors on City more and more. That has to play into it. And when I think of these player pathway comments as a component of the roster construction, I think of those two players first and foremost. You've also got Miguel Perez, you have Caden Glover, you've got Brendan McSorley, Emil Jaskalainen, both forwards. So when we think about what St. Louis is going to do in the offseason, what they're going to do in signing players, those players have to be evaluated. And when Corey Wray talks about MLS readiness and being an MLS player, part of that's the evaluation. Emil Jaskalainen, for instance, he was a super draft pick who has a City 2 contract right now. Will Corey Wray project him as an MLS player? Will the scouting department project him as an MLS player? If so, that will play into who they want to sign up front in the forward position. And so blocking players, allowing a more cohesive pathway up, continuing to allow that and enhancing it to make sure that when you identify those players, that you have more confidence that they're going to make an impact at the MLS level. We've seen the downside to this of Miguel Perez, I would say, arguably, where he had almost by necessity to be thrown into MLS play based on what our roster looked like in 2023 and injuries. And then he almost fell off a cliff as far as his productivity, time spent, and we shipped him out to Birmingham for a loan. He came back, took a little bit, and now he got up and running with City 2 to be one of the top goal scorers. That is a story where it's not a straight line, but maybe they stick with him and see what his growth can be. But also, what if it doesn't end up being an MLS level player? What if he taps out at USL Championship? Those are the decisions when you identify those players in the pathway of who do we need to bring in based on who we have and where we project them. A lot of moving pieces. So if you're thinking about, well, we don't want to block Miguel Perez. What if they don't project Miguel Perez as an MLS player? And what if they have data to support that? Those are the kinds of things I think are on the assumption front of if we see certain things happen, we start to assume that they've made certain determinations about players. Now, their assumptions and their determinations are going to come very data-driven. We know that. Corey Wray said, I think we need to look at how we use data in this day and age. I'm someone who relies on it to a certain extent to help communicate across the traditional and then the non-traditional way of scouting or squad build or trends or anything like that. Corey goes on to say, so I think, in terms of using data, I would use the word data informed, making sure we are using it, making sure it's the right place of the process, and then using it to make our traditional scouting and our other processes better. And so having the traditional side, the art and the science of scouting speak to the data and have the data speak to the traditional scouting is how I see a working kind of process going. And I've seen that work really well in the past. This is where Corey Wray's approach in Toronto and Columbus under Tim Bezbatchenko is going to come in handy. Corey Wray, if I had to say one sentence specifically about him, I think it's that. Corey Wray appears to be extremely data-driven and very meticulous with his processes. And so whether it's enhancing the analytics department, which we've heard reports from Tom Bogert that St. Louis has one of the smallest analytics departments in all of Major League Soccer, whether it's increasing the volume of people working in that department, whether it's increasing the time they focus and spend in that department, the overall data that they produce for their players, or just how the coaching staff implements all of those data, all that data that is gained and created from our analytics department, creating the cohesiveness in not just obtaining the data, gathering the data, but implementing it and using the scientific method of sorts, where you're seeing what works, what doesn't work, going back to the drawing board and improving the process as you go along. That's the overall philosophy that it seems like Corey's going to be bringing to the sporting department. But it's not just the sporting department that I think Corey has a lot of understanding and expectations about, because he also understands the fan base of St. Louis. And I loved this quote from Corey Wray, where he says, quote, "I will put Patrick Schulte on the spot, and this is a really good story. He messaged me and I said, look, I'm really excited to rep your hometown. Looking forward to your parents helping me out." And he followed up saying, look, win a couple games, then they'll call you. So I said, yeah, that's pretty intense. And he said, that's the St. Louis way. So I'm very aware of the expectations and the excitement with the fan base and the team. So I'm really looking forward to getting to know them even better. And if there's another, I would say, qualitative thing that gives me a lot of heart and excitement about from this press conference, it's Corey Wray saying that's the St. Louis way, and using it after a conversation with Patrick Schulte, understanding that winning does fix everything. If you can create a winning culture out of this organization, winning tends to fix everything. And that's underneath everything that Corey Wray is doing. He called himself a winner when it came to the press conference. He said he is a proven winner and he expects to win here. And so him understanding that that's what St. Louis craves at the end of the day, where you do have a good culture, you do have good character, you have good people, you have good processes, you have data-driven approaches. All of these things have to lead to winning. Otherwise, it's all for naught. And that's the bottom line for Corey Wray. So what does Corey Ray's timeline look for here in the future? Well, as we wrap up this episode of Flyover Footy, let's look at the offseason calendar of events for St. Louis in the next few months, rather. December 10th is really the next date that everything kind of coalesces around. December 10th, we'll see a couple events start. It sees the MLS College Showcase, where it's the 6th edition of it. It takes place for about 4 days, December 10th through the 13th in Mesa, Arizona. Closed door event. We're not going to know anything. We haven't known anything in the past, but it gives MLS clubs an opportunity to scout top collegiate prospects in the nation, including those players with remaining NCAA eligibility. Now, there's a lot that we could go through, and we might go through in the offseason about the changing landscape of collegiate soccer in the United States, but this is going off of the current model. And so these players that are being scouted on December 10th through the 13th will be available or potentially available in the Super Draft later in December. But the main thing for us to focus on as fans on December 10th is that's when free agency opens. Clubs can now engage with players other than their own that are eligible for free agency. Now, free agency in Major League Soccer is a little bit more complicated thanks to the CBA, but basically free agency sees eligible players who are out of contract with options declined, or who are at least 24 years old with a minimum of 4 years service in Major League Soccer. So, for instance, Roman Berkey, before we re-signed him, didn't qualify for free agency. He actually would have been, I think, eligible for the re-entry draft at the time, which is kind of funny. But Berkey wouldn't have qualified. Ben Luntz, I believe, is eligible for free agency. I think Josh Yarrow might be too, if I remember my notes correctly. But that's December 10th at noon, and we'll definitely cover it more as we get closer. It's over a month away. Thursday, December 11th begins the re-entry process, where stages 1 and 2 of a draft is conducted. And re-entry is basically the non-free agency folks, players who are at least 22, have a minimum of 1 year service, not eligible for free agency, out of contract, did not receive a bona fide offer, and are basically out there. So that's the re-entry process. So Corey Wray referenced all these. December 10th is free agency. 11th is re-entry. 11th also starts end of year waivers. They don't meet the minimum requirements for re-entry or free agency. And then after a couple stages of each, it comes to Thursday, December 18th, which is the 2026 MLS Super Draft. That's the thing I've got circled on my calendar too, because Corey Wray, like I talked about with Justin, has a proven track record in successful signings and picks in the Super Draft for Columbus. Max Arfston comes to mind, number 1 U.S. men's national team player now from Columbus. The Super Draft, St. Louis will have 2 picks as of right now in the Super Draft, first round and second round. We traded our third round draft pick because it's a 3-round draft. We traded our third round draft pick to Minnesota for Devin Padelford's loan earlier this season. So right now we have 2 draft picks, and we have the 7th overall pick as of right now in the first round. That means that we are what I call in the realm of a Generation Adidas type player, where they are automatically given a contract with Major League Soccer. They're signed to the league, guaranteed to be picked essentially in the draft, and because they've proven themselves enough to be that caliber of a prospect. So that's December 18th, the MLS Super Draft. Aside from that, the rest of the year, we're focused on a head coach. Corey, I think before we start signing players, before we start making moves, now it's the head coach. All eyes are on what this organization is going to do for the head coaching search, and that's where a lot of this will go. So I appreciate everyone joining me. That's kind of the wrap that I have on mine. I'm going to do a quick scan of the chat, the live stream chat, before I cut this one out. I did not get a chance to talk to Corey Wray after the press conference, other than the fact that he shook our hands. He seemed very personal, very nice, almost like David Critchley did and does when he finishes his press conference. That's good for him to be doing. There's a note in the chat. Philadelphia Union are finalizing a deal to sign Ghanaian youth international forward Ezekiel Alado from Olaf's old club, Brahmapajkarna. Club record fee in the region of $4.5 million. Thoughts fits our needs perfectly. Honestly, he could fit any need perfectly for right now, but it depends on what Corey Wray is going to identify as how he wants to build the squad going forward. This is an interesting time because it's tough to project who might be a good fit as the club is going through this shift in identity a little bit. We don't yet know what conclusions they've drawn. They haven't drawn conclusions yet. Everything I've talked about, Corey Ray is still in that data gathering mindset of what he wants this club to look like and which of a head coach do they want to be signing to implement that and to carry forward this style of play. So I struggle by saying this player A, B, or C would fit our needs perfectly just because of this nebulous time in City. We have to start wrapping our heads around the fact that our identity could shift slightly and the priorities of who and what type of player we need could shift along with that. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need certain positions. We don't have a left back on the roster. Central midfield is still Leuven and Durkin. I think we absolutely deserve an upgrade at that position. Center back, we only have 2 starting caliber center backs under contract right now, Falou Fall and Timo Baumgartel. Absolutely need help there. And we need help up front in some way as a goal scorer. So there are definitely objective needs, but I struggle now with even wanting to predict a player fitting our style, our system, knowing that it could all be about to shift even slightly that would change the profile that Ray and Diego and Hackworth and insert head coach here look for. Do I think he has specific people he wants to bring in? He mentioned a need for expertise in the sporting department and maybe mentioned bringing in a group of people. Could this affect Hackworth? Hackworth is still under contract. That's all I know. I do not know. They haven't been public about the length of contracts, but John Hackworth is still under contract, presumably for the entirety of next season. I don't yet expect that to change. Now, we don't have any reason one way or the other. So when I say I don't expect that to change, that might not mean a whole lot. Just because Hackworth's been with this organization for so long and he's created roots in St. Louis, his bike club, everything else that he does with the community. John Hackworth enjoys St. Louis by all accounts. And so I think it would take another job for him to leave as opposed to willingly or otherwise. Working with Diego, it seems like they made the decisions based on player option decisions based on John Hackworth. That's something Diego allowed or okayed. So it seems like they're wanting to have this continuity at least. Now, I do think that Corey Ray's mentioning of his vast knowledge and network of people does involve those in decision-making roles. And so, yes, I actually would expect some people to be hired to the organization in these analytics, data, scouting, whatever roles on the sporting side that Corey Wray does have familiarity with. I think that would make sense if they have proven track records of their own success. And it's not maybe somebody he met at Montreal, got along well with him and brought him in. I don't think he would do that, but it's a smart decision that would have to be brought in. And if he has experience, and he's even said, I know a lot of people now, so it wouldn't surprise me. I'm paraphrasing here. Wouldn't surprise me if I brought in somebody that I have had familiarity with or experience with, but that's not like the criteria. He was specific to say, I'm not bringing in people just because I know them. He's not looking to reshape the organization's front office based on friends and family type of a thing. I think that's about it for me on Flyover Footy. I am not diving into the ace discussion on this episode, though social media has done plenty for that one. Thank you for joining me here on Flyover Footy, our big look at Corey Ray's introductory press conference. Hopefully that gets a good idea of where we go with Corey Ray, at least at the moment, because so much is still unknown, but I think we have a decent idea of some of his philosophies of how he's looking to mold and shape St. Louis. We'll be back next time there's news. Like I said, if there's a head coach signing, we'll be back. If there's a player signing, we'll be back. If there's a big enough rumor and a juicy enough report, we'll be back for that as well. So stay tuned, Flyover Footy. I'll try to follow at Flyover Footy on the socials. I'll put out whenever we're doing new episodes. So thank you for joining us on this week. Enjoy the weekend if you're listening to this on a Friday or Saturday. And if not, enjoy wherever you are and whatever you're doing in St. Louis as the weather continues to change. Get out, see the foliage, and enjoy this offseason as best you can. Thanks all. All right. Thank you everyone for joining on the live stream. Appreciate your time. Hopefully you've had a good lunch during this. Go City as always. And hit me up if you have any questions on socials or just have anything you want to talk about as well at Flyover Footy or at Matt Baker STL. Appreciate y'all.